Today, I want to talk to you about how do I not feel overwhelmed during really challenging times. Sometimes the feeling of overwhelm can come from having so many things to do that it makes it difficult to start. But for others of us, the feeling of overwhelm can come from having no clue of where to start. So, either way, today we're going to talk about ways to not feel overwhelmed during some of your toughest challenges. So, the first place you should start when you're feeling overwhelmed is get clear on what the challenge or the issue really is. Okay. Sometimes we may feel feelings of anxiety, but we have no idea, no clue of where these feelings are even coming from. It could be hard to put into words what it is that we're actually feeling or what the issue truly is. So, in the first step, you want to just ask yourself, what is the true issue? What is the true challenge that I'm experiencing at the moment? Could be lying in bed at night, tossing and turning, worrying about the next day. Or maybe the next morning, you just dreading getting out of bed because you have this feeling of heaviness, this feeling of anxiety, this feeling of just feeling lost. You may feel drained the next morning when you wake up from all the energy that you spent the night before worrying about what was going to happen the next day. So let's get clear on exactly what the challenge is that's causing the overwhelm. And once you get clear on this challenge that's causing the overwhelm, then asking yourself, what have you been making this mean? Okay. Right. So oftentimes the challenges that we may have are things that we actually have solved in the past, or they're things that we are fully capable of handling, but there's something that's getting in the way that's caused this situation to feel more overwhelming than it should. So again, once you're clear on what the exact challenge is, ask yourself, what am I making this mean? Usually, the overwhelm doesn't come from the challenge. The overwhelm comes from what it is that you're making it mean because you have this challenge. So next, we're going to ask ourselves, what's the worst thing that can happen? All right. So you've been up all night, tossing and turning, going through all of these scenarios in your head. All right. And based off of these scenarios and these perceptions and what you made it mean, you had time to think about all the worst possible scenarios that could happen. So now let's just dive into it. So if you did ask yourself, what if I didn't resolve this challenge or this issue? What's the worst thing that could happen? I found that when you dive into what's the worst thing that could happen in a scenario, oftentimes worrying about what could happen is actually more painful than that thing actually happening in your life. Okay. We call this walking the plank. Okay. So the thing that I've discovered is when you do look at all the possible outcomes and in the worst case scenario, you'll find that even if this thing does go the worst way possible, it's a situation that you can handle. You can handle the consequences, you can handle the fallout, you can handle whatever that could possibly happen from a negative standpoint. Or you can adapt, you can adjust, you can improvise, and you can come up with ways to even solve that challenge if it comes to that. So while there are some benefits to looking ahead and seeing what are some of the possible threats or some of the possible worst case scenarios, it's usually not worth your time to worry or feel overwhelmed over those possible scenarios happening. Another worthwhile scenario worth looking into, it's a tongue twister there, is what if things never change? All right. So this is a little bit more difficult for a lot of us when it comes to making decisions and far as moving forward and not feeling overwhelmed when you ask yourself, what if things never change? Right. So if it never changed, would this situation still be okay with you? Would it be okay if it never got better? If your relationship never got better, if your job never got better, if your finances never got better, would it be okay with you? Would it be enough? This is a very important distinction to make when it comes to making a decision, whether you decide to go forward, whether you decide to just let things stay the way that they are, whether you allow procrastination to kick in, whether you let overwhelm continue to be in your life, right? So is I think these are really, really important steps to really just go ahead and consider the worst case scenario, consider if things never change, and then the next thing, what's the best thing that can happen? right? So we've already considered if nothing changes, we've considered the worst case scenario. So if you're going to use your imagination for all these things, then let's also use that imagination to imagine the best possible scenario that could happen here. All right. So ask yourself, what would be an extraordinary outcome? All right. So you have good outcomes and then you have extraordinary outcomes. All right. So ask yourself the best possible scenario, what would be an extraordinary outcome? What would be my perfect outcome for this situation? I believe that this is an important step because when you're envisioning what could possibly happen, that'll take away from the energy that you've been putting into the worst case scenario or the overwhelm that you've been feeling. And once the more that you can see yourself winning, the more that you can see yourself in an extraordinary situation, the less overwhelmed that you'll feel. Not only will you feel less overwhelmed, the more that you see yourself in a winning scenario, the more that you envision yourself winning, then this becomes the thing that you focus on. This becomes the thing that energizes you and helps you break past procrastination, anxiety, and feeling of overwhelm. So, after you've answered the question of if nothing ever changes and what's the best case scenario, this gives you some choices. Now you can choose to ask yourself, what will you make this mean going forward? All right? You can choose to continue to feel overwhelmed, to procrastinate, or you can emerge from this situation feeling more powerful and energized to actually take some actions. So the question is, will you decide to feel empowered and take some action steps now? So once you've decided to do something, that means that you've taken away all other possible options. This means that I'm clear on what the challenge is. I'm clear on the extraordinary outcome that I'm working towards. And I'm clear that I'm going to do whatever it takes and work towards my goals. This means that no matter how challenging the situation may appear to be, I'm going to do whatever it takes to not let overwhelm take over anymore and stay focused on the extraordinary outcome that I'm now dedicated to. So, next, you have to ask yourself, who am I going to be during this challenge? Am I going to be the leader? Am I going to be the spouse? Am I going to be the parent? Am I going to be the friend? Am I going to be whoever it is that I need to be in order to accomplish my goals? Am I going to show up powerfully, purposefully, fearlessly, and no longer let overwhelm creep in and cause procrastination or anxiety and get in the way of me showing up powerfully each day? And after getting clear on exactly who it is that you're going to be each day, the next question is, what will you do starting today? So take a look at that list that has felt overwhelming to you. Start with the biggest thing on that list that you see. Then ask yourself, what's the smallest step that I can take to accomplish this biggest thing on my list? And then just simply start with that. After you complete that thing, then ask yourself, what's the next smallest thing that I can do to accomplish this big, extraordinary thing on my list? And keep doing that until you accomplish your goals and you have your desired extraordinary outcome. So let's go back and answer that question. How do I not feel overwhelmed during really complicated times? First, get crystal clear on what the challenge and issues are. Then, look at the threats or the worst case scenarios. While you're looking at that, also consider what is the best extraordinary outcome that you could have. Finally, what opportunity will you take advantage of? Will you do nothing to take control of your overwhelm? Or will you go into powerful actions to take control over the way that you see and respond to complicated times? This is Tori Bryant, your transformation simplificator, simplifying the way that you see and respond to complicated times. I'll talk with you soon.